Hello and welcome to the Behind the Blockchain podcast. Today I'm joined by David Dobrovitsky, CEO of FUNToken. David, welcome to the show. How are you?
Thank you. Great to be here.
Thanks for joining me. So David, for people who don't know who you are, could you introduce yourself, please?
Sure. So I am the CEO of a project called FunToken. FunToken is a kind of like an OG project that is 7 years old on an Ethereum blockchain. It was initially created for gambling casinos and is now venturing into GameFi. Before this, I was a founder and CEO of an infrastructure project called Glitter Finance, and I led that project for 3 years. And before that, I was a core contributor to a couple of DeFi protocols. I was a CBDO in a marketing and development agency, and then before that, I worked kind of in a highly engineered cable sector in the United States. I've also worked with startups, so I actually help startups, get introductions to people that could help them. And yeah, and before that, I was a musician actually. So it's been a, a pretty long journey, but mostly in after music, it was mostly business development, lead generation, and eventually grew into business operations and being a CEO now several times.
That's cool. Sounds like you've done all sorts of stuff
Yeah,
during your career.
yeah.
What made you want to move away from being a musician? I can imagine that's quite a few people's like dream job, right?
Yeah, I mean, so I started as a kind of a prodigy at 5 years old. I was a classical violinist until the age of 27. Later in life, I started to really be interested in other things, because I guess I started so early in life. I just kind of grew out of it and wanted to settle down, have a family and maybe do something that I felt was a little bit more in line with my, with kind of with how I felt in kind of the next stage of my life. So that's the thing when you start really early, you kind of grow out of things.
Yeah, yeah, that's fair enough. And at what point through that journey did you initially take an interest in wanting to become an entrepreneur? Because you mentioned that you founded your own project, Glitter, before. Yeah, talk me through it.
So around the age of 22, when I was still doing music, I got confronted with the very stark reality that I had to move my own career. That nobody was going to come in and magically, make my career happen. And at that
Yeah.
point, we started to kind of, I started to see that okay, I need to know marketing, I need to know cold calling, I need to know business development, I need to know how to call a presenter and get myself out there, and I need to know how to create a website or at least tell somebody how to make it for me. And art is art, but then you're confronted with the reality of the world. And so at the time when I was studying at the Eastman School of Music in Rochester, it was a really good school and still is. And they had a music entrepreneurship program. This was when I was 19 to 21. And I kind of learned all of these different skills that I already was interested in and was learning anyway. And so when I came out of college, I started to really kind of arrange my own life and my own career. And as an entrepreneur already then, just being an entrepreneur who was also a musician. And so that kind of eventually progressed into where I felt like I wanted to get into tech because I was always very, very intrigued and interested in technology. And, obviously, I was also very interested in startups. The whole musician thing, there's a lot of kind of entrepreneurial startup feeling to it because you're kind of moving yourself, your career, your brand, and so it played really well into kind of technology, which I have, I guess, a kind of I'm very interested in it. I have a predisposition for technology to understand technology. Yeah, and so basically, I got into startups, and I was really really interested in startups from the very beginning. And so as my career progressed, eventually I got into blockchain, and I guess all of that culminated into being an entrepreneur and founder of my own startup eventually, which happened. I founded my startup in July 2021. And so really from that point on, it was me being a startup entrepreneur.
I bet that was a crazy ride.
Yeah, yeah, but it's cool though. You know, it's cool to kind of progress and grow, and I mean, you have to change as you grow and become older, and that's kind of what happened.
That's cool. And when you started your career, um, maybe after you're a musician, you kind of reinvented yourself, I guess, and looked at where you wanted to go. Did you always know that you wanted to be, a CEO of a business, running a large company? Like, was that your end goal, or were you just giving things a try and just kind of seeing what worked?
I kind of knew. I always felt like a leader. I felt like if I am put into a leadership role, I can do very well. I kind of felt comfortable making decisions, and I felt comfortable kind of creating a system that works. And I felt, and whether that was in within music or eventually tech or corporate and eventually blockchain, that never really changed. That just it's a quality that I had, and I kind of knew that if I don't fully allow that out, I won't be comfortable. And obviously, as you get older, you start to know yourself a little bit better. So by the time that I reached the stage where I could have my own startup, I knew that being a CEO was very much something I felt comfortable doing.
Okay. And being a CEO is, it's a lot of people's career aspirations, right? To reach that
Mm,
point in a business
yeah.
and everything. Are there any notable things that you've learned throughout your journey and throughout your life career which you think have really helped you to achieve that position?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stuff, obviously, one thing that you learn is you learn to listen, you learn to listen to other people, you learn to be patient, you learn to not act through a reaction, but through settling and then acting from a kind of a really like a peaceful internal state. One of the things that you always think about as a leader, as a CEO, is you never want to act out of fear. You never want to act out of anxiety or stress. So whatever decisions we make, the best thing to do is always to try to be calm, and then you get this feeling where you can like assess things, and you can come from you can come from a place that where you can make better decisions. So I think that that was the main thing that I learned. Other things that I learned is always always try to find the people that are capable of doing what you can't. you know you always want to have a staff where there are people that are smarter than you doing things that you don't know, and so you are not doing everything yourself. And it's not about delegation, because you can just as easily delegate to somebody who's not necessarily great at what they're doing, just because they're in that position. So it's a kind of a more a fine-tuned approach. You have to have people that are capable, you have to see that they're capable, and then you have to know when to give them that ability to own the process or a piece of a process, and that's really what I think works effectively. That's how you create agile organizations, when you have people who are really good at specific areas that maybe you're not the best at, but they can really own the process. They like doing it, and that's when you get the best results.
Did you find it tricky to give up ownership of certain parts of the job and kind of give that trust into people? Because I know when I stepped into I wasn't the CEO of the business at the time, but stepped into a management position, having to give up ownership of certain parts of the job to people who I'd hired, and obviously I'd hired them for a reason. Um, but it
Hmm.
was it was a tricky thing to kind of to go through in your head, really, to think, what, I'm comfortable giving away ownership of this. I trust this person. Like, it was definitely a process to go through. Did you find that?
Yeah, I mean, especially early on in Glitter, when I first founded it, I wanted to do everything myself. I wanted like really strong control over everything. Eventually, you kind of find that, look, I may know marketing, and I know marketing very well because I've been doing marketing for a very long time, but I'm not a marketing only specialist. There are marketing people who only do that. Can I give them? Can I delegate control to those people? Absolutely. Why wouldn't I? It would be incredibly stupid of me not to, because I mean that's what they do for a living. And
Mhm.
at some point you start to go, okay, what is good for the business? Like, not for the ego, not for me to feel safe, but just for the business. Does it make sense? I think, again, if you when you start to assess from a calm place, if you see somebody that truly is really good at what they do, and I think it also helped me because, glitter was, or it's kind of still exists, but glitter is a small business. When you're running a small business, you have a finite amount of energy and resources. And so, in that state, you really are forced to evaluate from like a cooler head, and try to become wiser at what you're doing. And so, given the conditions, you start to figure out that, like, yeah, okay, if this is a great person and they really know what they're doing, it's probably for the best of everybody for me to delegate to them, and try to get the maximum of their knowledge in the area.
For sure. And have you noticed anything different from being CEO and running Glitter to now becoming CEO at FunToken? Is there much difference between the two, between your mindset, between your approach?
Well, I mean, to be honest with you, the same baseline principles apply. I mean, the principles are, you have to make decisions from a calm place where you can have enough time and space to assess properly. You have to be able to pick people who are capable, um, because maybe in a larger organization it's easier to, for sometimes, for people that may not necessarily be always the absolute highest caliber in what they do, to kind of cruise. But at the end of the day, even in a large organization, when somebody is not necessarily the perfect fit for that job, it does affect the organization long term, because what you start to get is much larger cycles of execution, um, or execution that just is kind of fumbled, kind of like institutionalized stuff. And so the basic principles that you learn in a small business very much apply in a large business. The only difference is, how many layers does an institution or a large business have where you're able to make the decision that will help that institution or that large company? Like, what is the process that you have to go through? That's really what the change is. Because, in a small business, I want something, I get it done. I That's my decision. It's done. I'm the owner. When you're
Mm.
dealing with a multinational company, it's very different, and you have to be able to communicate why certain things are important to other decision makers that you're working collaboratively with. And that's important, and that collaboration and that teamwork is really important. So you have to kind of allow for the time and the space for decisions to take place, but ultimately speaking, the baseline never really changes. You need capable people, you need to be able to delegate to them effectively, you need to be able to pass decisions through and make them in a calm way so that you're not making rash decisions. That's the baseline, and then you have to be able to kind of work with the larger structure of a multinational business.
Mhm. Yeah, that makes sense. And this might be quite a tricky question to answer just because I think it will vary quite a lot. But can you talk us through the day in the life of a CEO?
Um, well, obviously, it varies whether you're running a startup or whether you're running or whether you are responsible, let's say, for a business that has presence internationally and in a large scale corporate structure. But the general thing is, a lot of the day is spent planning and observing and seeing how the processes that you put in place work and how they operate, and a lot of the day spent analyzing where the deficiencies are in execution, in reaching the public. I always think that, like, my wife says something that I really believe in, and I think she really gets it. She said, The job of the CEO is to always focus on the end user. That's really what you do. You take a product, and it's all about thinking, how can that product reach the end user effectively, so that the end user really connects to that product. So it's not necessarily to set up the all of the internal processes. Now you have to do that. You have to set it up. Sometimes you're blessed with an amazing COO, and that person can help you with that, and with operations. But sometimes you don't. And sometimes if you're the CEO, if you're responsible for setting up a lot of the internal processes, then that's what you do. So I would say half the day spent with an analysis of what works and what doesn't, and tweaking the process until it becomes seamless. And ideally speaking, when you really build everything up well, you no longer have to worry about a lot of that, and the business starts to run itself. And really, that's what it should be doing. You're kind of like a mechanic getting this machine to work well, so that you don't have to constantly fix it. But then the other half of the day is all about how are we delivering this process, or how is this process delivering the product effectively to the end user? How is it connecting? Is it connecting in a way that allows you to grow the way that you want to grow? And so I would say these are the two halves of being a CEO.
That's great insight. Was there anything that surprised you, or any challenges that you really weren't expecting when you became a CEO for the first time? That's anything that springs to mind.
I mean, I think that I don't want to call them surprises, but I would say you're always dealing with human nature, and in all of its good and in all of its bad, and they're both sides. And that's kind of like what the challenge is. You're dealing with egos, you're dealing with eccentricities, you're dealing with opinions, you're dealing with the end users also have bringing that to you. And so realistically speaking, that's the difficult part, is that you're dealing with people. I think what I wasn't prepared for the first time around was dealing with actual end users, and specifically, and this is very specific with crypto, because obviously if you're the CEO of Siemens, the public never sees you for the most part, unless you're attending Davos or something like that. Nobody knows who you are, I mean. So I mean, you're
Yeah.
dealing with the organization, you're thinking about the end user. But if you're working in the Web3, it's such an end user centric sector. You're literally constantly dealing with anons, you're dealing with traders, you're dealing with institutional investors, you're dealing with exchanges. You're constantly in the public eye, and so that is complicated, because in essence you have to be not just a really good at business and really good at strategy, but you also have to be a really good statesman in a way. um, and so that's a completely, I mean, Web3 is, that's why I think to a large extent Web3 is one of the hardest sectors, because there is that really strong element of constantly dealing with the people that actually use your product and may not be happy with you for whatever reason. And as we know, a person in a vacuum can make up their mind, and if one person makes up their mind, then other people may eventually make up their mind too, and they may influence those people. Then you have a whole kind of situation that you have to resolve. Very often a CEO in this sector may not be present in these situations. You know what I mean? Like, yes, you can send your community manager to talk to the people. You can send your community manager to do whatever, but at the end of the day, like, they will want your opinion. They will want your input. And then you basically have a situation where you have to draw the line of, okay, where am I comfortable talking to them and where am I not? You know? So there's a lot to it. There's a huge, enormous element of being able to socially connect with the end users and interact with them appropriately, where you're still comfortable, you still have your space, but at the same time, they feel like you're there and you're not just passing things off to people underneath you, which gives kind of a validity to your project, and so that, I think that that element very much is missing from many other sectors. They don't have to deal with this kind of thing situation, basically.
Yeah, it's a big added pressure, isn't it? When you're building something so publicly and openly that, if you have a large community of 100, 200, 300,000 people in Telegram or Discord groups and this kind of stuff, yeah, it's a lot of pressure for the team, not just for the
Yeah,
CEO, but also if you're an engineering team, for example, and people haven't heard updates for a little while and, they're putting loads of pressure on. Um, yeah, I can imagine
yep,
it's a tricky place to be and quite a
exactly.
difficult thing to get your head around.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, it's cool. I think that's where music helped me. When you go and you perform in Carnegie Hall for like three to 6,000 people, it's not as difficult to address, 5,000, a group of 5,000 anons. It really isn't, because you've been in that. So I guess in a way, my earlier career really prepared me for where I am right now, because I was used to interacting with large amounts of people, all of them who have an opinion, and who you cannot just disregard as whatever. So uh thank you, music. I guess.
So why did you take an interest in Web3 and blockchain initially?
I was working as a client development manager in a multinational, highly engineered cable, company that later became a division of another company, which was much bigger.
Mhm.
We were developing the kind of cables that are used in EV, for EV charging, and for like tanks, and for autonomous vehicles and stuff like that. So I was basically kind of trying to sell to Tesla and Google and Amazon, and I was also directing the on the ground, because I was an inside sales guy at the time, like a highly sought after in the Boston area, and I was directing a lot of the on the ground BDs, basically collaborating with them, getting the leads. And at some point, basically there was just large layoffs. There was nothing that I specifically did. It was just American industrial sector is very volatile. A lot of people got laid off. I was one of them, and I just genuinely couldn't find a job that matched my old salary and what I wanted. And because I was very deep in the startup and high tech sector, in that old job. So I really wanted to get back into that. And there were no opportunities. So at some point, I decided to, um, kind of put myself out there in different forums, and in different job searching engines, and internationally as well. And it just happened that a company reached out, that really, they were Eastern European. They really wanted to sell in the English speaking world. I'm bilingual with Russian. They really wanted to connect to American and English speaking public in general, and so it was just a good fit. I actually didn't fully know what blockchain was about at the time. For me, it was just a job. Like, they wanted something, and I had it, and that was specifically the ability to speak English like a native speaker. And so once I got into it, I for the first few days I really struggled to understand what the hell it was, because I mean it's software, it's esoteric, it's a little different than manufacturing cable. You can touch a cable, you can understand what it does, you can see the layers, you can see the copper and all of the stuff, and you can see how it fits, and you can talk to the engineer. And blockchain isn't like that. Everything is remote, and it's difficult to get. You can connect to an engineer or a developer, but at the end of the day, you still kind of have to get it. And it was a very funny situation. I actually asked my wife to go online, read about blockchain, and tell me what the hell it means, because I couldn't get it. I was kind of stressed out, and I had this job, and I had to start. I was a CBDO. I had to deliver leads, and really start to build a network, and I wasn't fully sure. And so eventually, she kind of translated it for me, not literally. And she read it, she got it, she told me I was able to come down. And yeah, as I started, I eventually figured it out, and it became very clear the more I got into it. I started to really understand it. I started to get the use cases, and I guess you could say this is how I got into it. It was a kind of a situation where blockchain was the only high tech sector at the time where I could find a job. For the strange reason that I'm bilingual. I lived in the United States my whole life, so my English is more or less that of a native person, and so that's where the job was. And eventually, I got it, and I started to like it, and that's kind of how I ended up in the sector.
And what keeps you here?
So first of all, I really like the fact that, and I still like the fact that, within blockchain presents the easiest way to raise as a startup, um, due to various innovations. Um, as somebody who's like very much a startupper, like I love the idea that you could have the ability to raise capital and quickly implement it towards building something. And obviously, when you're building software, it's much in a way it's much more effective and also easier than building something where you have to manufacture it. So that already creates a really kind of strong incentive to stay if you're trying to build something that is, that kind of has an impact. The other part of it is that I like the idea that specific things within Web3, like DeFi, really democratize money. The fact that you have this ability for just anybody from anywhere to start investing, getting a return, and they're in control over their own finances. The blockchain itself, in a way, is almost like can be used as your own kind of bank, and yet it's also very just transparent. So I would say that these two elements, and then of course being on the cutting edge, these two elements are what really kept me in it and kept my attention. And it's the fact that you could raise in an effective way and really put that capital towards building right away, and that was the atmosphere and very much still is. And then the second part is that you are democratizing money. You can make a real impact, and within specific sectors in Web3 like DeFi, there's still very much an atmosphere of we're built like it's almost like the old school like computer situation when they were building a Mac in their garage. That's kind of like how a lot of DeFi felt, and I was really attracted to it because I love the idea that just entrepreneurs, visionaries, people who are kind of just they have ideas and they have this juice to implement stuff, that they are given this opportunity to not necessarily, you know, go to huge VCs and have to, kind of really beg them for money and make sure that you hit all of the little check marks for them to invest in you. But you can very much get capital, and then you can build something out of your garage, if you want to call it, and that then that you have all of these teams dispersed and remote, and this global community comes together and they put something out, and that something can have a huge impact. So this kind of situation where it's lean, it's effective, it's remote, there is a way to make a real change, and you're working towards something that really attracted me, and I'm still interested in it.
Nice. Do you think you'd ever be tempted to go back to the Web 2 world if something interesting came along, or are you kind of Web 3 through and through now?
I mean, I sometimes from time to time I have some ideas. My family has some ideas we want to implement. I don't, it's not out of consideration. There are interesting things you can do. Again, it usually involves building software. But at the same time, I still very much like Web3. So I would say I'm more of a generalist. I'm more of a startup or techie rather than Web3 through and through. I love Web3. I know Web3. I work in Web3. I think there's incredible advantages to Web3, but I would be remiss to say that I'm only Web3. I think I'm a generalist more than just Web3.
Okay. Okay. So you've touched on it there, and I think you were touching on it at the start of our conversation as well. But from the outside looking in, sometimes working for a Web3 startup and blockchain projects and things can look quite glamorous. from the outside. It's this cool cutting edge industry that's building all this amazing new stuff. But what's it really like when you're actually on the ground building these projects kind of day in, day out? What's it really like?
It depends what stage you're on, but generally speaking, if you're in a startup, it's there's always a certain amount of stress involved, and until you find the right staff, it can be grueling. And if you have to deal with the social aspect of Web3, meaning you're dealing with the followers, the token holders, whatever it is, then it becomes complicated. You have to kind of toe a fine line of how much am I okay connecting to them? How much am I leaving myself to myself? Where is that space? You know, how much am I taking personally? How much am I not taking personally? And what's appropriate. So you have to create that kind of kind of almost like a framework for yourself. Like what's right, what's okay, where is it okay to connect to them, where do I need to draw the line, how is the interaction going to go, like how if somebody is unhappy, how deep am I going to get into how personal I'm going to get into it, or should I let somebody else handle it? There's a tremendous amount of communication and PR involved, but really communication, um, dealing with people, actually dealing with people. Like I said before, we're not removed from, this is not like working in Amazon or something. Like it's not like creating an autonomous vehicle startup, right? Autonomous vehicle startup. If you're the CEO, you have a few engineers, you're talking to Ford for them to buy your startup. That's the extent of what, and then you hire a marketing firm, you get a nice logo and a nice website, nice PR and stuff like that. And that's basically where you draw the line. Maybe I've seen a few times in startups in other sectors, people there were CEOs that were very outspoken, and they would sometimes like post on LinkedIn, for example.
Mhm.
But interactions on LinkedIn are also always very, very professional because you're dealing it's conversation between business people. You don't really have that luxury again in Web3 because you're dealing with Twitter or X. You're dealing with Reddit, you're dealing with Telegram, you're dealing with Discord, you're dealing with developers. I mean, it's an enormous on traders, so it's a completely different ball game. So yes, I mean, it's very glamorous, it's great, but you have to understand that there's in Web3 there's an edit component, an edit skill set that you need to have in order to be able to navigate it.
Mm. And how do you go about learning that? Just trial and error and seeing what works, what doesn't? Or, is there somewhere that you went to think, what, I need a bit of a crash course in PR? How do I approach this?
Well, there's definitely no college degree for it. No, I mean, I would say first and foremost, a lot of the stuff you learn on the personal experience. With me, I came a little bit more prepared than others because, as I said, I was a musician, so I had learned a lot about interactions and being in front of a lot of different people, and so I wasn't necessarily as nervous and as green as some others. But I wouldn't say that I was totally prepared for dealing with, let's say, like anons. It's a completely different situation because, as we know, a lot of people when they're anonymous, they go beast mode. Like, oh, you don't know who I am. Let me just say whatever I want.
Yeah.
And so that is not something that you can learn by reading anything, or even by reading like in forums and stuff like that. Like you just have to kind of go with it and roll with it. And the whole PR thing is very complicated because everybody knows what you're supposed to be doing, and if you're doing something inappropriate, until they're confronted with a situation where they're right there on Twitter and somebody is saying really, really bad things, whether right in the right way or not, whether they're correct or not. And so when you're in that situation, until you've dealt with two, three, four, five times of that, you're not prepared to deal with it. And anybody who tells you or judges you at the time doesn't know what they're talking about, because it's a very different thing when that light is on you. You know what I mean? Like,
Mm.
you're being talked about, you're being talked at, the light is on you. It's up to you to respond, and you're dealing with uh, groups of people for whom the social media is their microphone, right? And so you may reply, it may be misperceived, but they have a very loud platform, and so that is very complicated. Now, a lot of CEOs withdraw when that happens, and understandably so. I don't think that it's the right thing to do, for the simple reason that whether you withdraw or whether you don't, stuff will still be said about you. And there's different schools of thought about it. Like, do you want to take the higher ground and just never respond? And I'm above this. Do you want to tackle this head on and try to be diplomatic and really smart about it? Is there a way to be smart about it? Because if people want to go at it with you, is there a way to handle it? So there's a lot of different ways that you can think about doing it. I have seen even times when you hire high quality PR firms or high quality marketing firms, them mishandle it and them not necessarily do the greatest job. So really all you get is, when you don't engage, is you get this situation as a CEO that you don't have to take accountability for it. So what I'm saying is, it's very complicated. This is human nature. This is human interaction. It doesn't get easy. So in my opinion, what you can do is, you can learn how to deal with it. You can learn how to not to sweat it too hard, how to just be cool, how to not make rash decisions, and how to, if sometimes you need to stand by what you feel is correct, you stand by it. It is what it is. You know what I mean? I mean that at the end of the day, that's what being a leader is about. The buck stops with you. You make the call. You feel it's the right thing. You did your best. Your intention was not to hurt anybody, was not to hurt your organization, and you felt it was right. And at that point, the chips can fall where they may. But because you are what you are, you're a leader, that's what you do, and that's it. You know what I mean? So I think there is a kind of a Zen wisdom to it. You know what I mean? At some point, as a decision maker, you have to be able to go there, because, especially in a sector like Web3, you will be there. It will happen. There's no such a thing as a Web3 startup that has never had issues. There's just no such a thing. They don't exist. Some Web3 companies have better PR departments than others. That's all. you know. So
Yeah, and if you haven't had the issues so far, at some point they'll probably come up.
absolutely. Again, it's all about being a public figure, knowing how to be a public figure, knowing how to be a public company. It is what it is. You have to be able to take it, the good and the bad, and the good is never the only thing that you encounter.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. And is that one of the main things that you'd like people to understand about the industry before becoming a part of it? Is there anything else that you'd like to make people aware of? You know, anything you think people should really do or really know before going, you know what, I really want a career in Web3, but you need to be aware of these things or these situations first, or anything like that springs to mind?
I think there's really only two things that I think are important to understand about Web3 before you start to build. The first thing is that, like what I mentioned, the social aspect, that this is very much in the public eye kind of sector. You will not be able to escape it. You have to be able to go in front of people, talk to them about stuff, and you have to be ready for the fact that some of them will like you and some of them will not. It's just this is just the basic truth and reality. The other thing I think about Web3 is, I feel like people need to understand that it's all about making a quality product. Just because you're in a sector where you can raise easier, in no way implies that you are not obligated to make a really high quality product.
Mm.
And so I think that kind of is these are the kind of the two things. So yes, it's awesome because you can raise easy, Yes, it's super fast and super exciting. Yes, it's really glamorous to an extent, but then there's a huge social aspect to it, huge aspect of it of being out in front of people and public figure, and at the same time, nobody will be okay if the product isn't good. So that very much works just like in other fields. Although actually, in other fields, sometimes people don't make necessarily great products, and sometimes it's passable. But generally speaking, like in Web3, you do find that because so much of the product interacts so much with knowledgeable people, like traders that really do know what you build, or other entrepreneurs or institutions, the product will be very much under the microscope. So that quality, it has to be there.
Definitely. And obviously, out your career in Web3, you must have interviewed tons of people, hired tons of people, trained them, helped people on their career journeys. Is there any advice that you can share for people who are looking to build a successful career in Web3? I know that's quite a generalized question, but are there any like key attributes you think people need to really develop in themselves to have a successful career in this space?
Um, well, first of all, you need to be comfortable. It depends on which part of Web3 you are. If you're an engineer, a lot of it has to do with you being open minded and being able to learn by yourself. I mean, a lot of Web3 is non standard. You know, some of the best engineers are self-taught. They go to forums, they learn code, they interact with other engineers. That's how they learn. They become great, and then they pick up more and more languages. And that's not college. That's not a system.
Yeah,
That's your own personal self-improvement process where you're genuinely interested in something and you learn it. And so one of the big aspects of Web3 is you have to be very comfortable not being standard. You know, that it's not about college and it's not about your boss telling you to do something. You just have to do it. Another aspect of Web3 is that a lot of the teams are very remote. And so you have to be able to be comfortable being a self-starter. Like you have to pick yourself up, you have to manage yourself. Nobody's going to hold your hand, you know? So if you're
yeah,
about wanting that Web3 is not going to work out. Not really, because there are very few huge companies where you genuinely have this huge training program. Now, like in my own company in Glitter, we did have an apprenticeship program, and we trained a couple of incredibly successful developers. But it was genuinely an apprenticeship program. It wasn't like a training course for people who are coming in, let's say, selling insurance, and then they're getting a training course. You know what I mean? Or like it wasn't like
yeah.
medical school and you're doing your residency somewhere. This was an apprenticeship of two people that were remote, working in different, sometimes in different time zones, and they interacted, and you have to be able to pick that stuff up, like languages and stuff like that. So I would say, being able to be non-standard, being a self-starter, these are the most important aspects of being effective in Web3.
Completely agree. The ability to learn by yourself, I think is really key. The
Yeah,
industry is
yeah,
changing
absolutely.
almost daily. Almost daily, there's new things coming out, um, and
Exactly.
it can be quite difficult to keep in touch, right? So I feel like you have to be able to be a self starter. You have to be able to learn by yourself and be very comfortable doing it, and really want to do it as well. Because if you don't want to do it, you'll get left behind very very quickly. So I feel like
Yeah,
that's a key
absolutely.
attribute that you need to have really.
Yeah, and then especially with
Um,
the amount of, like you said, the amount of information flying at you when you're working online, just it's not the kind of profession where, like, if you're a doctor or if you're a lawyer, I guess you still continue to be a student of your craft, of your sector, but basically, like, you already know a certain thing, right? It's not going to go like human body isn't going to change on you. right?
Yeah.
With Web3, that's not necessarily the case, you know? And so, like, you can know blockchain and then something new comes out, like DAG, for example, and that's different and it works differently. And yet it works a little similarly to blockchain, but it's different. And you have to understand what it is and what it does. In a specific time frame, you're dealing with monolithic blockchains, and then all of a sudden, a year later, you're dealing with blockchains that are modular. And it's a completely different. Like it's not the same. It's very different. And you have to be able to wrap your head around it and how the technology changed and the applications and all of that, and even the engineering languages change. So yeah, the amount of information that comes at you, you have to be able to really understand and catch it, digest it, and understand how it applies to you know to the world, to the sector, to who you're hiring and how you're running things. You know.
Yeah, 100%. Do you have any advice on where someone can go? This might be quite a difficult question, on where someone can go to stay up to date with news in the industry, or stay up to date with new developments, or to yeah, kind of keep updating their skills and things like this.
I mean, I get a lot from X, honestly, from Twitter. It's there's a
Yeah.
lot of updates. I also interact on Telegram with various colleagues. You hear things, you hear about new technologies. One of the interesting things about Web3 is that so much of our professional information is on social media rather than necessarily journals. By the time you hear it in journals, it's old news, usually. So it's a very different kind of thing. It's a very different sector, you're just dealing with information flying at you, and from people from all over the world sharing new technology and new ideas of how that a technology can be applied and developed and engineered and all of that. So I would say social media is big. Specific channels, influencers are very big. And then beyond that, you can go to journals, and you can try to figure out if uh, the information is up to date. But I would say social media is number one, actually.
Okay. And do you think there's basic courses that everyone should do, regardless of the job that you're going into when you want to become a part of the industry? Do you think there are base level, there's like a base level knowledge, or kind of basic courses that everyone should try and do? Because everyone that I speak to, whether they're a software engineer, whether they're a marketing manager, whether they're a community, whether they're a CEO, most people in the space really understand the technology, which you don't really get in Web 2. Um, what's your opinion on that? Do you think everyone needs that base level of understanding?
It all depends on how you learn. And I can
Okay.
only speak for myself. I learn really well by myself. I'm very good at learning. But then again, I used to read the encyclopedia for fun when I was little. So honestly, it's like I'm a nerd. Like that's all I can say. I'm just a very big nerd, and I constantly self study. I can't help it. It's just my nature. I'm very curious, and I constantly got information, whether it was like reading encyclopedias or watching YouTube on specific things. Like it's a specific personality. I can't help it. Like I love to learn. So for me, I don't do courses because I already am learning constantly. I'm very curious by nature, and I just do it myself. And I know that for example, a lot of developers do it the same way. They don't have courses; they just genuinely pick it up. They interact with other people. They get taught something, and they pick it up. I also learn from my colleagues. I see somebody doing really good marketing. I'm like, oh, that's amazing. That's a great idea. I didn't know that you could do it that way. So I learned that way as well, by just doing it and then interacting. But again, it depends on how you learn because that's how I learn. Somebody else may need to go sit in the course and have it taught to them, and kind of that's how they take their information. I take my information kind of my own way. And
Yeah.
so I have known people that have done classes, and that was very good for them. But so I don't think that there's a necessarily set way. It all really all depends on what type of a learner you are, and how you like to take new information and implement it within your professional life. You know what I mean? So it could work. Could be that taking a class in blockchain is something that could be incredibly beneficial. But for me, even when I was a musician, yeah, I took a couple of courses for entrepreneurship, like marketing, creating a website, some stuff like that. But at the end of the day, I started to pick it up. I learned cold calling by cold calling, then I learned marketing by marketing, and then I kind of just got deeper and deeper. And then when I was doing highly engineered like cable stuff, I learned by talking to the engineers and talking to the clients, going back to the engineers, having the engineer on the call, listening to what the engineer said, and learning about different kind of schematics and stuff like that. I was just very good at picking up technology and understanding how it works. And then eventually, when I got into blockchain, after I stopped freaking out about blockchain because it seemed so esoteric to me at first, as I mentioned, like I had to have my wife literally tell me what the heck it is.
Yeah.
After I stopped being freaked out by it, it started to make sense to me. Once I got a hang of it and I kind of got on that wavelength, I started to learn myself. And the initial way that I learned was by contributing to DeFi protocols and learning how things work. It was really fascinating stuff. I mean, you learn so much. Like, we were doing a protocol that kind of was one of the first protocols trying to implement Islamic finance into DeFi. And so I started to know about Islamic finance. And then I started to think, how can you implement that towards DeFi? And so I learned about DeFi and Islamic finance and learn about finance that way. And it was always that way, it was always this way. It was like trying to create something, learning different parts of a story, connecting it all together, implementing it, living it, seeing if it works, if it flies, and then going back to the drawing board if it doesn't. And that's kind of how I learned. But like I said, there are many ways of doing it, and some people may need to sit in the classroom, and then maybe they don't go through the same process of failure, and then maybe they have a smoother ride. I don't know. It depends on kind of how you learn.
For sure. And would you say then that having a base level understanding of the tech is super important to be successful in Web3?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, you have to know what it does. You have to know what it does. Like, you have to understand different blockchains, what separates them, what the different consensus mechanism is, the different speeds. I would say you have to use them. Like, I've used a ton of blockchains. You have to get that
Mm.
feel, you have to get your hands, in it. Um, you have to experience an airdrop. You have to go and claim something, and so that you learn how it works. You have to go and market yourself so you understand the marketing. I mean, like, you have to do. If you don't do, it's very difficult to understand. But then, of course, the whole point is for you to understand the material deeply so that you can really kind of be flexible and nimble with it, so that when new information comes in, you know how to plug that in on top of what you already know, and then you kind of can, maneuver and guide your organization in the correct way, I would say.
And do you think that will change? Because if you look at Web2, for example, not everyone in Web2, say you work at a technology company, really only the engineers and the product guys within the company will understand how the actual tech works
Hmm.
from a real kind of deep technology level. Do you think that will change in Web3 as more companies start to adopt the use of blockchain, and as we probably as more apps get built, we'll stop talking about blockchain and we'll talk about the actual product instead of kind of what powers it or what it's built on? Do you think then things will start to change, or do you think there will always be a need to understand the underlying tech behind everything?
I think that when you look at the most effective CEOs, like for example Steve Jobs, you see an underlying theme where they knew what the technology does. They may not have been engineers, but they understood what the engineers were doing. And I
Mm.
think that that's always true. Like, the business component has to understand the technology component. You can't make decisions that are truly effective unless you understand what the technologists are doing and where they're leading. Because if the theory that it's a job of the CEO to make sure that the end user connects to the product effectively. If that theory is true, how can you not know what the technology is? Do you know what I mean? Like, who is going to connect the product to the end user? How is that going to happen? It's not the job of the engineer to do that. The engineer is supposed to make working tech. It's not the job of the marketer to do it, because the marketer is all about getting your attention and bringing you in. It's not the job of the business development to do it, because the job of the business developer is to create the leads and try to close them. So somebody has to be responsible for connecting to the end user. And that usually in the good companies, it's the CEO. So if the top doesn't know what the technology is doing, how can you make effective products? You just can't, because there's nobody to fill that niche of this technology does this, and that's why it will be incredibly essential in your life. And on the other hand, I understand how you live, and that's why you should connect to this technology. You know what I mean? So that
Yeah.
aspect, if the CEO doesn't understand what the technology is doing, then they can't fulfill that role. At the same time, if a COO doesn't know what the technology is doing, then they can't run operations around that connection about setting the CEO's strategy and vision to reality from the inside, so that the process aids the CEO instead of hinders the CEO, if that makes sense. So that component of understanding the technology will always have to be there. Otherwise, you're just not going to be able to make effective products.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you've explained to me before that you advise startups and you've advised founders and things before, right? Is
Yes.
that one of the common mistakes that you see people make? Like, are there any others that have really stood out to you over that time that you'd be able to share?
Yeah, I mean, the inability to know how to connect effectively to the end user from the very top is often a big problem. It's not an easy thing to fix. It means that you have to somehow use your empathy, use your knowledge, use your will to connect to somebody else instead of being closed in what you know. So that is a problem, and that's something that a lot of the top founders have to, are overcoming or have to overcome. I would also say that another problem that I see is sometimes people don't build products that necessarily can bring them revenue, and maybe they're trying to sell the token more than create a revenue. You know, that's another problem that we see in the business.
Mhm.
Um, and I'm not sure that I don't think that's the right approach. It's just my opinion. Other people can disagree with me. Obviously, we all act from our life experience. That's what it is. For me, a business is not viable unless you have a way to have a revenue. Other people feel like if you sell a token effectively, that's all that matters. And in a way, they're right to an extent, but it's still not a complete business, and it's very fragile within a bad market if that's how you structure it. So I would say these are the two top problems that I see.
Okay, it's interesting and good insight. The revenue topic we could probably get into uh, very deeply. I can imagine.
Oh
Um,
yeah, it's a good hour.
well, David, obviously over the last hour or so, you've shared some brilliant advice and some great insight. One question I always like to ask everyone before we finish up, knowing what you know now about leadership, about running a business, about technology, marketing, being a CEO, whatever it might be. If you could go back to the start of your career, is there any advice that
Mhm.
you would have for your younger self?
Yeah, I think the advice would be to chill. I mean, I think
Okay.
that that's the number one advice. I To never act out of stress and never act out of fear. You know, and that's a great advice for life and not just business. You never want to act out of the negative emotions. You want to try to bring yourself to a modicum of kind of zen, and kind of like the state where you're comfortable, you know,
Hmm.
because you just make a better decisions that way, provided that we all come from the basic truth that we all want positive outcomes. That's the best approach. And so if you are able to chill, if you're able to make decisions out of a calm place, then you save yourself a lot of heartache and problems and overreactions and stuff like that, and you can solve problems much easier, and you create better processes, within your organization that works better, that itself then resolves the problem. So I would say that this is the number one advice I would give myself.
I really like that. I'm going to take that away myself to
Thank you.
chill. I like it.
Okay, we're happy to help.
Well, David, thank you very much for taking the time to have a conversation today. I've really enjoyed it. Like I said, you shared some brilliant advice. It was great to understand your
My pleasure.
journey
Okay.
in a lot more detail. And yeah, I'll definitely be looking forward to listening to this one back, and I'll be taking a ton of notes on a lot of the advice that you've shared. Um, if anyone is listening or watching to this and they would like to reach out to you, they maybe have extra questions, or they might want to kind of pick your brain about anything else. Is it fairly easy to get in touch with you over Twitter, for example, Telegram, Twitter, Discord, LinkedIn?
Yeah, I prefer LinkedIn. I just think it's a really good professional way of starting a conversation.
Mhm.
I do a lot of the stuff that I do over other platforms like Telegram, but I prefer to do initial introductions over LinkedIn and kind of just take them towards platforms that are a little bit more personal. And
Okay,
so I would say LinkedIn is the best place to get in touch with me.
great stuff. Well, David, thanks again, and I'll speak to you soon.
Thank you.